All right, guys, I'm here to introduce you episode number 13 of the Rooster's Crow podcast. I had the opportunity to speak with David Patrick Harry of the Church of the Eternal Logos YouTube channel, and we had a very meaningful conversation. I got a lot from it and was able to kind of open up to each other. We had a very similar path in terms of our backgrounds in philosophy with psychedelics and then finding kind of orthodoxy. So he's got a great channel. He had a very popular, psychedelic channel called the Fractal Universe, where it was very successful, which he completely gave up on and sacrificed the income and what he was making there because he, kind of found the logos. And his channel is about his experience with orthodoxy and finding the logos and struggling with his faith. He's really an authentic, genuine guy. We had a great conversation and touched on a lot about our paths to kind of where we are now and things of that nature. So without further ado, I bring to you guys David Patrick Harry. Thanks so much. All right. So episode number 13 of the Rooster's Crow podcast. I'm pleased to have here David Patrick Harry. Thank you for joining me, sir, of the Church of the Eternal Logos.
Well, thank you very much, brother, for having me.
Yeah, man, it's a pleasure and it's a joy to have you kind of here in front of me as I've been, watching you over the past few years and unwittingly as I was watching your Fractal Universe channel. Is that correct?
Yep.
And I was heavily into Terrence McKenna and the machine elves, and your channel was just amazing. And I would be showing my wife all these fractal images. She's like, what the hell are you showing me? And I'm like, you just don't understand. This is the ultimate reality here. So I guess, and I'm going to link to a couple talks that really got into your background. Your talk with Brother Augustine, which just happenstance, I'm talking with him next week. So it's interesting how those resonances happen, which you went into your background, which I wasn't really aware of. So I'm going to link to that. And there was something else that I'll link to in your channel, which is a beautiful channel. I love the artwork. I love the different things that you're doing. You're bringing that creativity that you brought to the fractal universe to this kind of weird emerging Christian mystic part of the internet.
Yeah. Especially the Orthodoxy thing. It's really interesting what's happening. I'm kind of known in the Orthodox online content creator sphere as the sort of psychedelic guy. I do more of apologetics geared towards people that would find themselves in the New Age or spiritual, not religious, or in the psychedelics or into the occult. And so my goal is that's where I was. Obviously, we both now are very much interested in Orthodox Christianity. And I always tell people it's a bit of a labyrinth to get into orthodoxy. You can't, one conversation, one idea, it's not going to get somebody there. It's really an individual pursuit for authentic truth. And then how serious you are, I think eventually it takes you there. But for me, my channel is to build bridges, conceptual bridges for a lot of those people. And so that's how I see my work, is that it was when I first got out of the psychedelic and the New Age and that whole YouTube channel. So for those listening, I had a previous YouTube channel called Fractal Universe. Fractal as in fractal mathematics, and then universe spelled Y-O-U, insinuating the sort of illuministic framework that you are the universe. You are the sentient apparatus of the universe, aware of itself, perceiving itself, and therefore have a privileged perspective. And so I was convinced of this and produced tons of content, really trying to promote sort of the psychonautic or psychedelic thinkers. And I wanted to add incredible visuals to those words to really give it a deeper experiential dimension. And eventually that came to an end. I realized that couldn't be true. And my own research into Orthodox theology, though I was a non-believer, really weighed on me. And so about 8 months after doing all that, I gave up much of what I believed before and tried to transition. And that transition left a lot of people that knew me. They didn't understand my new perspective. Not that they didn't trust me. They knew who I was. They knew my morals. They knew my integrity and everything that I was interested in. But before I was doing all the psychedelic stuff, and now I've made a radical transition to trying to tell people that Christianity, specifically Orthodox theology, Logos theology, is the one true world religion. And really, that's the frustration of people not understanding that. Like close friends of mine, again, I'm trying to explain that to somebody. They just couldn't. They're like, don't understand it. And I just felt compelled that I had to create a new YouTube channel to really just try to explain myself. And that's how I feel like I do what I do now. It's really me explaining myself. The goal always to think through a topic at somewhat, try to be deep. And so when I come and I present a live stream or I present a series of ideas, they've already been so well thought out, hopefully, if I do it right, that I can connect dots for people. And by connecting those dots, again, they can see what I'm seeing. And that is me explaining myself. So whether they are realizing it or not, by the end of the stream, hopefully, they've connected dots and they can see an angle on the world that I see. Mm-hmm. And that is slowly, over time, over years, me explaining why I am where I am and what I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. You went right there, because that was kind of my first question was, so I guess it's a kind of a two-part question. What would David Patrick Harry of 3 years ago, let's say when you first started making the Fractal Universe, what would he think of you today? And what was it that made you consider Orthodox theology? And what did that feel like of the old paradigm breaking away, right? And then the new one coming into being? What did that feel like?
Okay, so the first part of that question was,
what would David Patrick Harry of 4 years ago think about you today?
I think he would certainly, the presupposition that I was working off of was a very perennialistic worldview. And so being deep embedded into psychedelics, it wasn't even the traditional. When we talk about a perennialist, usually the analogy is somebody who believes that all religions lead to the same mountaintop, meaning that there's a specific destination which all religions are taking people to all around the world. And these are all cultural variants, and therefore they're equally valid. I had a similar position, but as a psychedelic person, it was that all those were leading to really the psychedelic revelation as the full spiritual pinnacle. And so having that being my presupposition, I think if myself 3 or 4 years ago saw what I'm doing now, they would be absolutely astonished that I would be trying to argue for the validity of one single tradition. Because it would be parroting, had been much of the sort of basic arguments against religion. It's their cultural variants. They control populations. They create a sort of servitude mentality. They prevent one from knowing ultimate truth. All these, again, I would consider very basic, low-level arguments that seem to be critical. They seem to be a little bit more sophisticated. But again, that journey towards truth. So then the transition into Orthodoxy was for me, and it's very different for every person, right? It was, for me, it was such an intellectual entry point that Christianity was totally a non-option. It didn't even make sense as becoming Christian. So I did my undergraduate here at the University of Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. It's in Indianapolis, Indiana. And there I studied biology and religious studies. And I spent 2 summers in southern China at a university studying Mandarin and Chinese culture. And was very interested in theories of magic, how language affected reality, how ritual can affect reality, what is conjuration, these types of things. That led into my master's research at the University of Illinois, focusing on early Christianity, specifically an interest in Gnosticism, and also psychedelic shamanism. So I worked with the Native American professor there in the religious studies department, specifically interested in the use of entheogens or intoxicants for spiritual enlightenment. that led to me not wanting to be a historical scholar, because my capstone project was looking at ancient Greek, reading text and then making an argument. And it just felt like that definitely wasn't what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So when I got accepted for my PhD program, it was to study people who are spiritual but not religious, and how they appropriate religious symbols. So I was interested in why the Buddhist for this, why Ganesha for that, why Christ consciousness for this, and how they appropriate what they mean, and sort of putting the symbols, the semiotics of their worldview together, and see if that would correspond to sort of a deeper analysis. I never really got going into that research. So the first semester I got into my PhD program, I came across a book called The Psychedelic Gospels by Jerry and Julie Brown. And this book, The Psychedelic Gospels, makes the argument that there was potentially a secret Eucharistic tradition within Christianity, specifically the use of psychedelic mushrooms. And so as evidence, they demonstrate what is very apparent, psychedelic imagery or mushroom imagery in the Psalter of Canterbury, in a church in Hildesheim, Germany, Plain Carrault, France, churches in Spain, Italy, Turkey. You'd see what appeared to be psychedelic mushrooms, or the Amanita muscaria mushroom, the very famous red and white dotted mushroom. You see the toad from Mario Kart, very iconic symbol and mushroom. They were making this case. I really got into this research and doing my own research into their thesis. I did not come to the conclusion that there was a historic, secret Eucharistic tradition. My conclusion was that this was a historically contextualized phenomenon somewhere between the 900s and the beginning of the 1400s, and that a heretical group of Christians known as the Cathars, the Albigensians, they went to the Holy Land during the Crusades, and they encountered the Manichaeans and Gnostic forms of Christianity, of which Illuministic frameworks were central to their theology. So taking mushrooms for the Manichaeans, this was a known thing. That what it appears to be is that these Christians encountered these practices and brought them back to Europe when they came back from the Holy Land. That's why then they presented these ideas in frescoes, wall paintings. So getting into that, I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. Historically contextualized phenomenon. I wonder, given my understanding of psychedelics and its relationship globally, Siberian shamanism, Slavic cultures, Slavic languages, much more affiliated with mushrooms. In English, we only have a few words for mushrooms: fungus, mushroom, and toadstool. So we don't have a whole lot of a vocabulary to express mushrooms, where in Slavic languages, they have hundreds and hundreds of words. It's very common for a young girl to go into the woods with her grandmother or mother and pick mushrooms and then cook those mushrooms. So different relationship to mushroom culture. I thought, okay, at the time, my ex-girlfriend was a Ukrainian, that she knew Russian. She could help me look at some of these words. It was very interesting. She did agree with the whole mushroom culture thing, that, you know what, I will take an Eastern Orthodox Christian theology and history course. And while I'm taking this course, do my own research, diving into and see if I can find any mushroom symbolism, because that would be really interesting, connecting this theory. So of course I didn't find any mushrooms, but studying the Loskis and the Luths and the Stanilows, that I got immersed in Orthodox theology. And for me, for me, it was perfect because I had a sort of intellectual background that I was bringing to it. So when I could read the theology, I was absolutely a non-believer. It resonated with me. I thought it was very interesting. It was much more beautiful than I would ever suspected the theology to be. And so by the end of the semester, I was convinced that if I were to adopt, if I were to become compartmentalized, right? If I was to limit myself to one religious tradition, this logos theology stuff is really, really interesting. And so for me, the entry point into Orthodoxy was entirely intellectual. And so it was like, I've entered Orthodoxy at the most abstract and been moving towards the center of it ever since. That's how I look at it. That's how I felt about it, because it wasn't necessarily an emotional conversion. It wasn't a spiritual conversion. It was looking at the metaphysical framework of the worldview and saying, geez, well, that's actually much more coherent than what I have. And then after just realizing that and it weighing on me, eventually that took me to a place where with Donald Trump, 2018, the cultural transition that people are going through, the Jordan Peterson phenomenon, that just conservative values in themselves, masculinity. I was in Berkeley, California. I'm being surrounded by people who literally demonize me because I'm a white man and the values that I believe to be true, which those values I believe have made me successful. And so it was just this weird realization that the psychedelics, the progressive, all the things that I was pushing, in fact, making money off of, because that's how I was living in California. I was then living in that society, and I absolutely hated it, and it hated me. And so that took a process, and then realizing that, connecting all that, that was what was going on through 2018 after taking all this theology course. So it's like my politics, that just the realization of everything that's going on. You can sense it. I was into Peterson, the whole countercultural Trump movement. It was cool, the meme warfare. But I actually had a psychedelic experience. I don't talk too much about this because it's not that psychedelics brought me to Christ at all. I don't ever want to frame it that way. But I did all this theology. I was really interested in Orthodoxy. In fact, I began to really read Orthodox theology and the Church Fathers. And then I had an LSD experience, I think in August or September of 18. And what it did was just confront me with everything that I had been thinking, but I didn't want to address. And basically that I needed to follow the logos. It was kind of the message. You get mantras when you go in these altar states, which I don't recommend anybody doing. I'm not advocating for this. I'm just saying this was my experience, this is my takeaway. And so you get these mantras, you get these ideas or messages that are repeated over, and hopefully it's a good one, right? This is how people have terrible trips and all this stuff. But mine was to follow the logos. And so all these things that I was very much interested in as a new ager, as a spiritual, not religious, as a psychedelic, like Illuminism, connecting that with an inverted understanding of theosis, connecting the idea that we're all one as an inversion of loving your neighbor as yourself, realizing that the whole mystical psychedelic understanding of language and even the visibility of language under altered states, this is, again, a misunderstanding of the logos and the incarnation of the word and what all that means at a metaphysical level. So I started to connect all these things that I believed in, but realized what I really believed in was within a traditional Christian framework. Even though at the time I got exposed to those ideas through the New Age, through the spiritual, not religious. So then on 11/11/18, that's when, this would probably been a month after this experience, and I had been praying. It just came to a point in my heart that I could not deny what I felt. And so even though that came to a more of a heart-centered decision, it was very, very intellectually driven. And so on 11/11/18, made a prayer, committed my life to Christ. And I didn't know what that meant. Even then, talking about the literality and the historical nature of the incarnation of God was difficult, right? Because I still was using a sort of Jordan Peterson framework. You could talk about the archetypal patterns. You could talk about speaking truth and ordering the world. You could do all these different things. And I knew that was true. But when somebody who disagreed with everything that I was saying would come up to me and mock me as believing that Jesus walked on water, I didn't have a lot to bring to that, because it felt like I was also insulting my own intelligence. But and this is where I talk about to some of the younger guys, now through prayer, through building a relationship with God. Again, for me, I was so distant because it was so abstract, moving towards the center of who truth is, that is Christ. So then building that relationship through prayer, that's what really transforms one. That's what brings one into the ability to talk about Christ, unabashedly. And then through that personal transition, you realize that wasn't you the whole time. And that's really difficult to explain, how you've come to a place of knowing something that you can't know. It's not like I was there 2,000 years ago. It's not like I can point to something to a non-believer and show that Jesus Christ is God. But now to not say that seems empty. Before, at one point, even though going down the Christian path, that was difficult to say. Now, to not say that is almost more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow, that was beautiful. Marsh Mcluhan says that faith is a mode of perception, right? So if you don't have that faith and you're trying, if you have that faith, you really believe and you try to show others, while they might not understand it, I still think there's an effect that happens. If they see someone like you that is so intellectually apt, that has read so much, so well read, has his PhD, has thought through this so long and so hard, that someone like you can have faith in Christ is a powerful thing. It's a powerful thing. So even if someone ridicules it, I mean, how do you not ridicule it? I mean, all of the cultural baggage with saying the word Jesus Christ, what we see on TV, what we see on movies, what we see in commercials, what we've taught, and what we see about the Catholic Church and what happened with, the pedophiles and whatnot. How could you not have, this automatic reaction to the words Jesus Christ, right? So it takes courage to be out there and put yourself out there, and it has an effect. I'll tell you that. And I don't know why it's happening now. I had the same experience kind of through Peterson in 2018, actually, especially his biblical lecture series. And I came into kind of return to the faith. I was Greek Orthodox as a child. My parents moved here from Greece, essentially when my mom was pregnant with me, Greek immigrants. And I went to church for the first 10 years of my life with my grandma. I had no idea kind of what I was doing, and then fell away and really got into this intellectual pursuit of philosophy. I studied philosophy at university, and then really got into integral theory, Ken Wilber, back in 2009, which introduced me to Buddhism, meditation, and kind of this whole Eastern orientation towards religion and mysticism, and kind of got heavily into that myself. And then, cut to long story short, it was Chinese medicine and Taoism that I found as the truest instantiation of this idea of religion that I could come across. And I still think that I don't see, there's this idea of religious syncretism, that, all religions are like spokes on a wheel, and the center of the wheel is God, right? And I've been battling with this idea. I don't. And Father Seraphim Rose, his book, His Life and Works, and Christ the Eternal Tao, was a linchpin for me to say, Taoism isn't wrong, right? The Hebrews, the pagans, even the Norse, the Native Americans, they're not wrong. They're incomplete, right? They're little seeds of the Logos that didn't sprout, right? God had to become man to bring the truth to humanity. And dealing with God became man, like you have to really deal with that. And when I see Peterson, his recent conversation with Jonathan Peugeot, and you see him broken down, it's like, it's the Holy Spirit working through him, and he's just fighting it as much as he can. And just, interesting kind of synchronies here. I went from this intellectual experience of coming to Christianity through the church fathers, and had kind of the Logos penetrate from the head down into the heart. Right. And then when it reaches the heart, that's when you can have that authentic prayer where you're talking to the person instead of, meditating and allowing yourself to hear God, which there's a lot of levels between you and God. Right. So you're not hearing God. You might be hearing angels, or whatever you want to call it. And they're both good and bad, and they can heal you or they can hurt you. So you're, when you're interacting with these spaces through meditation or psychedelics, you are playing in a space that you don't have the capacity to understand. And it's very exciting and it's very interesting, but be very mindful and careful of it. And I was a psychedelic proselytizer before, and now I'm saying, I'm pump the brakes. I'm not telling anybody to do psychedelics because set and setting is important. And when the world is as it is now, the global set and setting is not ripe to take psychedelics, especially for the first time, because stuff is accelerating quickly.
And because of that, I think the world is an initiation process. So when you get into these altered states, you have to be very difficult, or you have to be very conscientious about the things that may emerge while you're in that altered state. And so when we look at the world right now, I mean, just the absolute pure degeneracy on television, on any sort of entertainment, mainstream entertainment, even on YouTube. What does YouTube promote? And if you're in that altered state, I mean, I just saw that Lil Nas X, the rapper, right? He's come out with a new song and a new shoe partnered with Nike called Satan's Shoe. So there's only 666 shoes. There is a literal drop of human blood in the bottom of the shoe. So they put 60 cc's of red dye and 1 drop of real blood. So in your little air packet in the back, it's all red. It's filled with liquid. It looks like blood. They did put 1 drop of human blood inside of it. And in his music video, he strip dances as a gay man and then goes and grinds on Satan's lap. And so just with that framework, that when you go into these altered states, I mean, you basically have to seclude yourself and go into nature and pray or something to try to have somewhat of a decent experience. But again, I would almost, like you're saying, don't do them right now. Like it's such the chaos in the world is there to really pull you deeper into it. And that's why there's a few things I want to say in regards to that the psychedelics, the presupposition that you go into these altered states to attain knowledge, this Gnostic idea, this illuministic framework that you find in magic, alchemy, all this different stuff, all Western esoteric traditions. This is the opposite way in which you would approach God from an Orthodox Christian perspective, that we approach God through his energies. And so using logic, using reason, using love, using honor, using truth, these, by literally engaging in those activities, I'm engaging with the energy of God. The more I do that, the more I become energized by that energy, technically synergized, becoming more and more like God. So from that framework, you're not even going to, if you really want to learn more, you need to start getting serious. And it's more effort, right? It's way more effort to actually read and try to think logically about the world and be consistent than to say, okay, well, I basically believe in a relativistic worldview and I can go into these altered states, which I find pleasurable and that I enjoy and that I would still enjoy. I haven't done psychedelics since I converted to Orthodoxy, but I know that's still a temptation for me. I like cognitive inebriation. I enjoy that. It's literally a pleasure for me. So that is in itself technically a sin, just the breaking of sobriety. But you don't approach God through these mechanisms. You approach God through a very serious rigor of pursuit for truth. And that only makes sense. It only makes sense that would be the case to actually get towards God.
Yeah, I see that. So just to double click on that a little bit, this idea of, so the icon you have of Christ behind you. And what I see actually, in my perception, is these icons are literally pushing away those pictures. They were probably lower, the ones with the kind of psychedelic pictures, literally coming in and pushing them out of the picture. So I kind of see that happening. It's actually quite beautiful. And the idea that you see of Christ, you always see him with either a scroll or the Bible in one hand and blessing with the other hand. And this is the structure of reality in itself, right? The left hand blesses, it provides mercy. And that's what our world is kind of focused on, right? This hyper compassion, right? But the other hand is rigor, right? You have to have asceticism and rigor and mercy. And in the middle, you have Christ. So we've gone too far to the left in terms of the sins of the left hand, where just too much compassion causes disintegration, but too much rigor, right? Too much asceticism without the compassion causes disintegration as well. Right. So it's finding this balance point. And that's why I love the icons of the Pantocrator of Christ. He's always holding the scroll, right? Rigor and mercy in the other hand. So it's always this kind of this dichotomy, and understanding that and understanding that these stories in the Bible and these ideas, they are the literal physical structure of reality. The stories are how the prodigal son, like, they happen in your life. We are living the Bible every day. And to understand that and to look and reorient yourself to reading scripture with new eyes is something that I would and I don't like advising, but I would recommend doing that, and with an open heart, and praying. Like prayer, I've been praying daily in the Jesus prayer, and a lot of different prayers from the saints for the last year, probably 17 months. And the effects, and I've talked about this, that it's had on my life, in my family's life, the change and the quality of the relationships that I have within myself, with my wife and my family, the healing of the relationships with, again, the community, with my people at work. And I made a video talking about prayer, and I said that, how do you know that you're on the right path, right? Because I was very, very into Taoism, and was like, this is the truth, guys, right? Like, this is just so profound. I want to share this with everyone. But in my personal life, I was completely captured by a spiritual ego. In my mind, I was doing Reiki, and I quit a 6-figure business to start a meditation company called Trinity Energy Works. I have about 24 t-shirts as the receipts of this terrible decision to make. And I'm like, this stuff was so profound for me. I'm going to quit my 6-figure job. I have a son, and I'm going to start this business and spend all my savings on it, or I'm going to do Reiki. I'm going to teach meditation. And my main path through Taoism was Neigong and Qigong, the internal martial arts. So alchemy, and working with the 5 elements, and visualizations, mantras, mudras, connecting with heaven and earth, and it felt so right to me. But the effects that it had in the relationships in my life were disorienting. And I had this, what I thought was Archangel Metatron come to me, and he did. And it was the strangest thing. And I'd had these thoughts, this thought pop into my head always: you got to leave your wife in order for you to heal the world and go out and be a healer and travel the globe. You got to leave your wife. And I'm like, what the hell? And like, just all of these things that were disintegrating towards my relationships. Right. I am just thankful to God, because my wife is an angel. She stuck with me for what looked like from the outside as a mental breakdown. Right. This guy all of a sudden quit his 6-figure job. We have bills. And, I stopped watching sports. I stopped caring about Christmas. I'm like, this is just, Christmas is ridiculous. And just all of this stuff happened. And I thank God that I came out of that. And it was through Peterson, who I interviewed, Vin Armani, and he said Peterson is like a John the Baptist figure. I'm like, wow, that's an interesting thing to explore there.
I don't know if I'd go that far. I don't. That feels uncomfortable to me. But.
Yeah. Well, like a John the Baptist figure, right? Because he's saying repent, and he's.
I didn't hear. From Peterson. I didn't get that. I thought Peterson's message was about taking responsibility. That can be a form. Repentance is a form of responsibility, but his message was about responsibility.
Yeah.
I didn't see, because repentance is the problem he's struggling with, as we talked about with the Paggio conversation, of which I was frustrated with, because I like Jonathan Paggio, and I'm not here to judge what his conversation or what he deemed appropriate with his friend Jordan Peterson, but it was clear to me that Peterson wanted to hold on to something. And the part where my heart sunk down to my stomach was when Peterson was almost pleading, why do I need to literally believe in this? And he got nothing in return. And it's like, that would have been the perfect opportunity to actually go into the Logos Logi and the archetypal understandings, and bringing in a literal theology of the Logos, and then bringing that all the way to the point of its literality, of which he already talked about archetypally, but the theology itself is saying the same thing. And the man was on the edge of tears, and it's just like, I wish it turned more into literally talking about theology and not about symbols, and not using secular rhetorical language. But I agree with you in regards to Peterson. I did a whole stream on this. I see Peterson as a major transition point in the sort of consciousness of the male psyche in the Western world. And all he did was then just reorient our perspective and our attention to show what we were losing. Because he himself, his own presuppositions are losing those things, right? He is a classical liberal. Classical liberalism as a post-enlightenment philosophy itself is antagonistic to all the things that he is also promoting. So there's an internal philosophical schism in his own worldview. But but that's not the point. The point is that he literally changed, he changed my life, in my attention of focus, right? Again,
Likewise.
and that's what I think was so powerful is that he reoriented young men's focus to something that's visible, like
Mhm.
truth, like speaking truth, putting order into these are conceptual ideas. And man, the correct authority of man, biblically speaking, is to be your eyes on God. And so what Peterson did in my mind is he moved our attention to the energies of Christ, though that's not how he would articulate it at all. But
If he
that's
are,
what he
yeah,
did. And that's why so many people have converted to Christ.
I think if he would have
Go ahead. I'm
articulated it,
sorry.
if he would have articulated like that, I think seeing him struggle, I think, and continue to struggle is more powerful than if you just said, you know what, guys, I believe in Christ. Like, and I think the
I
conversation that,
agree. No, I
yeah,
absolutely agree.
that Jonathan had, the first part,
Go ahead. I
I
didn't mean
was
to
a,
cut you off.
I was a little frustrated at the first part, but the second part of the conversation was just one of the most, brought me to tears. And I don't think Peterson is not going to be reached intellectually. Like he's intellectually,
Right.
there and sharp. So I think it's more of a heart to heart of experiencing the tears that he's having with him and answering questions, but not like intellectually and linguistically hitting him over the head with, well, if you, and he kind of did, I saw you in church and you squirmed in church. Jonathan said, I'm probably the only person that's seeing you in church and I saw you squirm in there. So just saying that, it's like, it's presenting these kind of opportunities. And I found that conversation was important and frustrating, but important, just like Peterson is as a
Agreed.
whole. And his biblical lecture series saved my marriage. It reoriented me towards my faith. Like it was, and I didn't know that was happening when it was happening, but I'm like, how can, this guy who's so intellectually sophisticated take these stories in the Bible seriously? So let me check out these lectures. I watched every lecture from start to finish. And gave me my opportunity for metanoia, right? And it was, that wasn't the metanoia, but it was the path to, okay, look at the church fathers. And then through Jonathan Pigeon, this idea of symbolism, of the appropriate mediation of heaven and earth, right? Symbolism in Greek is synvoli. Sin is to come together, and voli is so it's the coming together of two worlds, and that happens appropriately through the mediation of the Logos in man. And understanding that, and then reading the church fathers brought me to where I am now. So, he is and I'm not saying he is John the Baptist, but this figure where he's like calling to people like, sort yourself out, clean your room, take responsibility, be a good person, right? I think it's a reflection of that pattern, just like all the stories in the Bible are patterns of reality, and they manifest themselves in different ways, right? Sometimes not as potent, sometimes less potent, but these are the stories that are playing out. And it's interesting how so many people through Jordan Peterson, who's not a Christian, came to Christianity. What do you make of that?
I make it as providence. I see it all as a historical providential moment with COVID and everything, the pandemic, as I prefer to refer it to, that it is God calling his own, and especially the young men. I mean, because I'm getting emails, every week I get messages from somebody that was somewhere in a different state, and within the last year and a half, could be the last 6 months, could be the last month, something has radically changed. They're changing the way they live their lives. Again, just like you said, things are now, there's real life in their life, the relationships they have with other people, there's growth, things are moving. And so it feels like that with evil confronting people at such an obvious level right now, that you really are forced to sort of choose a side at a sort of spiritual level. Not that I'm saying that people are aware of this. I'm just saying that that's why it feels like such young men who have the time, have the energy, have the resources to do some research are now coming to a point where they want to get into the church. They want to take this stuff seriously. They want more meaning. And it builds off of what Peterson built. I mean, I feel like Peterson was building a bridge that never reached the other side. And so people like, I would feel like I'm trying to continue that bridge. People like Jay Dyer, people like other YouTube channels are building on this bridge. And Peterson sort of with his notoriety, began to build it. And what this bridge is just using the ideas, secular language to look into Christianity and start speaking truth to the world through it. Of course, like I said, he wasn't a Christian, as you recognize, but that doesn't negate the validity of what he's saying in regards to truth. It's just that he's not, it just appear that he's not following through and where all these things would come from if what he's saying is ultimately true. Just taking that to the very last logical conclusion, that would mean God is, and then trying to figure out which God, and then clearly he's totally rooted within a Christian worldview. So then what form of Christianity? I mean, it's so. I see the Peterson phenomenon then as synonymous with Trump. Like, I don't see that as these two different phenomena. It's all the same pendulum move, working in different spheres of reality. One's intellectual, one's political, more cultural. Both of them are cultural. Both of them are extremely mimetic, right? But I see it as providential. I see a historical pendulum. And I don't think the world itself is going to necessarily become more traditional. But I think those people who are pursuing truth and actually witnessing what's going on in the world, that a pendulum movement, really, I would say from the beginning of the Great Schism of 1054 with Orthodoxy and Catholicism, that the Western world, Christendom, which Christ only promised 1,000 years of his church, which we got, right? We got 1,000 years. And from then, we've seen the Great Schism, then we see the Reformation in 1517, and we just see this continual disintegration, a differentiation, multiplicity within what we would call Western civilization to the point of the Enlightenment. Now we get to the Enlightenment. Now we've got the New World. We're building America and all this stuff. Now, we get to the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution, the technology, man landing on the moon, however you feel about that. But it feels like this whole trajectory is a pendulum swing to the left, right? And that now finally Trump represented the ending of that pendulum swing moving to the left. But it doesn't mean that the powers that be, that again, the real principalities of this world aren't trying to, again, have an agenda with all that stuff. But you can feel the energy. You can feel it. And it's so beyond any sort of human construction because of the patterns in people's lives and how people are really living a Christian life is not easy, especially if you want to give things up, because the way you get closer to God is by giving things up. That's the hardest part.
Sacrifice. Yeah. That's the hardest part. And I have this idea, and I don't know if it's my idea or if I heard it. Do you think this makes any sense? Right. So Christ himself had to die to be resurrected, right? The church is a manifestation of Christ's body, of Christ on the earth. The disintegration of the church, do you see this pattern of just as Christ had to die to be resurrected, the church has to die to be resurrected? And that maybe we're seeing this, I mean, the church as this political and historical cultural institution is dead. And I don't mean it like that, right? But it's not dead. It's coming back to life. It's resurrecting, because people that even that in the last 50 years, at least from my experience, people that, and this was kept me from the churches, people that go into church, I'm like, they're hypocrites. They're not really believing what they're doing. Their lives aren't changing. Why would I go back to that? And it went from this beautiful architecture, cathedrals, to these warehouses where you have like rock music and whatnot, and super inclusive, which sounds wonderful and excellent to our sensibilities from kind of where we are culturally. But do you think that we're in a place of a resurrection of the church? And what does the church look like in the age, as Mcluhan says, the electronic age? What does the future of the church look like?
Yeah. Wow. That opens up a real big window to talk about, bring in Mcluhan's idea in regards to the future of the church. because for those of you who aren't aware, Marshall McLuhan was a sort of theorist of technology and media specifically. It just turned into more electronic technology because that's what he was talking about. But he has a very important idea in regards to the global village, and that with the growth in electronic mediums, beginning with the radio, but now specifically the television, and we can just translate that to the personal computer now. It alters what he would call the sensory ratios of an individual, the ratio mechanisms in which we acquire information. And that he argued that a literate man, a man that read and spoke an alphabet, which began with the Greeks, that person has a different sensory ratio in which the visual coordinate is the most dominant sensory ratio. And so that makes sense at a theological level of Christ, who makes the blind unseen. He is the word. He is language itself. He is the alphabet. He is the Alpha and the Omega. He is the beginning of the transmission of communication, because you can't commune, you can't have a community without communication. And so he is the word. He is the Logos of God. And so that, I think, from that framework, that Christ spread himself through reading and writing, that differentiates us than for different language systems, though they may have, Chinese has a written language, Sanskrit has a written language. The difference is between some of these more pictorial languages, again, is a structured alphabet. This is what he was interested in, what he called a more of a literate, not that they don't read, it's just a little bit different way in which they're approaching information transmission. So the alphabet was a big deal for him. As we moved into an electronic state, our sensory ratios have altered. And it's not that because we're no longer as literate as before, we're becoming more of a tribal sensory ratio, which means that our ears become the primary sensory ratio. And that when you exist in an acoustic world, if you just look at a model, if you stand anywhere, and you're at Walmart, you're in your room, sound itself vibrates into waves. And so as a listener, you're always at the center of your informational acquirement. You're always at the center of the world. The world's about you. You can see these presuppositions, which we already see totally present in our society, that are imbued in the use of the mediums that we have. Again, this is way beyond most people's perception when they're engaging in the computer or their smartphone or whatever. So with that being said, what are some of the thoughts on the church in the future? Well, it seems like they're obviously going to have to engage in those mediums. But I think if moving back to, because I think also tied to much of this Orthodox stuff is more traditional living, traditional marriages, traditional values, potentially homesteading, growing your own food. That what we see is that I think as we move closer to Christ, we move closer to a traditional framework in light of a global technologized world. And so it's like we exist in both, but we're going to have to read more. We're going to have to write more. In fact, sheltering our children with how much they're exposed to iPads and stuff, this is essential because it's altering their ratios. And if they are already fixed by the age of 7, they didn't read or write as a primary mode of information transmission, it's already over. Their sensory ratios are already fixed. They're already going to be an acoustic, which isn't totally bad. But again, that's why he was all about learning these theories and then having what he would call a diet regarding the medias you choose, because they do affect your ratios. And anybody who uses technology knows that their attention span using social media and their phone isn't the same. A day when you're not using that and you try to read, you can focus better. But when you start engaging in the dopamine flashes, like you literally can't focus. You can feel that. So just imagine what that's doing as a society all the time. Mm-hmm. And so, sorry to ramble again, as I always do, but yeah, the church of the future, then it seems like we're going to have to be even more focused on the word. Mm-hmm. Even more focused on the word.
Yeah. No, well said. And one of my main kind of, interests, whether it's conscious or not, is can we reverse engineer these technologies, which seem to be disintegrating coherence and culture? Can we reverse engineer them to, make the algorithm for the good, right? Because In his book, Understanding Media, Mcluhan's book, Understanding Media, the subsection is media is the extensions of man, right?
Mm-hmm.
So media is the extensions of man. Makes me think, then what is man if the wheel is an extension of our feet? You know, the fork, the best way to look at it is a fork is an extension of the hand. It even looks like it, right? Um, and it's he's got a lot of ideas of this way that new technologies retrieve something of the old. So he talks about how the automobile is a retrieval of the night, right? Because you're in this kind of fortress, right, and you're moving along, and this idea of these media structures and the media landscapes recede into the background. So as a new technology comes into being, its effects, we focus on the content and its effects, which are more important, right? The reorganization of our consciousness, the restructuring of our relationships is what happens when a new media comes and takes hold. And he has this book, Theories of Communication, that Eric Mcluhan, his son, wrote with him. And he talks about, it's an ironic thing because he doesn't have a theory of communication. And he talks about how he doesn't come to and explore a media landscape, a media environment, as he called them, with a preconceived notion. He looked at it like he's probing, more like a safe cracker, where, a safe cracker is listening and he's turning and kind of listening to crack open the safe. And I'm like, how can you come to anything without a presupposition? And then it made me think of this idea of being in the world, but not of it, right? So if you come to, like, TV is bad or the internet is bad, if you come to it with a preconceived notion, you're already instantiating an ideology, an idolatry. If you can step back without making whatever it is that you're exploring and probing, without coming to a conclusion, right? That's kind of what he was trying to do. And I find him, it was, again, seeing someone so philosophically and intellectually sophisticated and well-read, who was a convert to Christianity, to Catholic Christianity in his 20s. Rene Girard, who was a postmodern, highly prolific in postmodern psychoanalytic thought, late in his life converted to Catholicism. I'm like, whoa, what's going on here? So seeing these different things happen is quite amazing, and the idea of that, technologies are the extensions of man. So what is technology? Like, what is technology?
Well, that can be seen in a few different ways. Again, with the idea of the extension of man, this is often rooted within an evolutionary framework, because the idea of the tools themselves being extensions of man is that man had stopped his biological evolution, and that evolution is now occurring at a cognitive level. And so cognitively, that's why we create these tools and extend ourselves out into the world. I don't believe in macroevolution. I think most honest academics now don't believe in macroevolution. Speciation, which is considered microevolution, that's clearly true, that physical characteristics do change based on the environment and niches life inhabits. But macroevolution, and so some people may hear this and think that, how could anybody say that? I would challenge anybody to just look honestly into this stuff, that macroevolution is not, Darwinian Wallace theory of evolution is not as concrete as you would think. Many atheist scholars no longer believe that, at least that can't be the possible, just based on probability and numbers themselves. So leave that alone.
Would you say evolution is a technology?
Well, that could get tied into another perception of technology, and that I see technology, especially at the electronic form. Again, nothing can be entirely evil in and of itself. Evil within an Orthodox framework, again, is a free choice. So evil itself doesn't have a positive existence. We don't believe in an eternal battle between good and evil. We believe in a battle between entities that have free will, that choose to not align themselves with God's will. That is evil. And so that now encompasses all types of behaviors and ideas, including the most wretched things. So technology I talked about as the Tower of Babel. And so when we look at electronic technology, again, not that we are having this conversation through a technological means, But technology itself is like a unified language. And so the 0 and 1s is a sort of form of code. You can build a world that's made in the image of man. This is where I think theologically you can start to see how technology and even the rise of the sort of AI and all this stuff is almost like the fallen entity taking on a physical body. Because if Lucifer did want to be God, he falls out of heaven. He now becomes Satan, the devil, and still rules this world, who he was given while he was Lucifer before the fall. But if he despises God, he's going to also despise all things created by God. And that would mean the sort of biological vessel. So when we look at what man is doing with technology, he's building things in his image, but we have a fallen image. And it would be that fallen image that the fallen one would cloak himself in. Because it's disconnected from God. And in fact, he used God's creation, mankind, to subvert and actually create him for himself.
Yeah.
And so when I look at Silicon Valley, when I look to censorship of truth, I mean, obviously true things. So this isn't, and I'm not going to say anything, that have hot words. The AI, the algorithm pick it up, but anybody that has a little bit of discernment can see what's going on. And so, and it's not that everybody is evil. I don't have this large conspiratorial plan that everybody has these deep evil thoughts. It's that all you have to do is be attached to your sin. That's the chain, the leash that binds you to this process. And that's the problem. So we're all contributing to it. I'm contributing to it. We all are. But so technology then I see is a double-sided sword, because the Tower of Babel I see as a form of technology and trying to create something to reach heaven, man trying to create immortality, transhumanism, man trying to create a new earth, space travel, terraforming. This is all man wanting to be God. This is all original sin stuff, and it can't lead to life.
Yeah.
So that's why I think from another angle, technology can be seen as a continual attempt of man making things in his own image. But because that is true, it's also good and bad. So it's not all evil.
Yeah, man, I thank you for answering that. And I these questions come to me and I don't know the answer. They're not like gotcha questions. So I'm like, when I ask these questions, I don't know. And for you to take that question on and answer it, so forthrightly, I appreciate that. And I just made a short 2-minute video about this idea of, the Tower of Babel was a ziggurat, essentially, that a people that spoke the same language were building, not to reach God, but to summon God to come down to them, right? And this idea of there was a universal language that people spoke back then. What is our universal language? Science, right?
Yeah.
Zeros and ones. This idea of the scientific method, which is not evil in itself, but that's what the globe, no matter what language you speak or what culture you're in, you do science in the same language. So we're using this same language to build artificial intelligence, which is literally going to embody, we look at it as artificial general intelligence. These are just new words for the same old thing, right?
Exactly.
And what happened when the Tower of Babel was built? What did God do? Right. So we're close to that, if we're not already there. So what does that look like after we reach, let's say we're going to reach whatever the singularity, whatever you want to call it, or whatever that looks like. What does that look like in the world, in the actual world? Any ideas?
Well, I think it looks like death. And I mean that in a really serious way, not to be overly dramatic, and it just slow incremental steps towards death. But this world can only, again, Satan, or however you want to look at the use of technology, progressive ideology, globalism, these are all faux forms of unity. The only way in which we can have true unity or even equality amongst people is in the light of God. God created all of us. We all have equal worth in the light of God. within the world of creation, we are not entirely equal. I mean, human nature is equal, but we all have different gifts. We all have very unique personalities. That equality doesn't actually exist in the world outside of God. And so what we see then, because everything is an inversion, everything is a distortion of truth, that we have these faux forms of unity. So inclusion, an inclusionary language of the progressive left, is inclusive of the diversity of phenotypes, but they all have the same ideology.
Yeah.
And so it's not real diversity. Again, the words aren't actually what they mean. This is the father of lies. This is how you can tell that this stuff isn't coming from God, because the words themselves, the processes don't mean what it's not truth.
Yeah.
So the artificial attempts at unity, whether that be the ideologies or the global climate emphasis that we're all, again, one village, globalism is a faux form of unity, the destruction of national boundaries is a faux form of unity. And so when man attempts to implement these things, he's going to have to kill people.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a violent process. This is the communistic yearning. This is man's control. This is ultimately the evil one, rendering his plans through mankind. So,
just a quick week. So communism, right? So communism is communion without Christ, right? The ideas of communism are so attractive, especially to young people. It's like how to distribute things equally, get rid of work and toil and all of these things. It's like the kingdom of heaven without Christ, right? Communism, we need communionism, and it's so interesting to kind of see that and see how so many people are attracted, no matter what happened in the 20th century with all of this destruction and death that happened through communism and through these ideologies. It still presses forth. Like it's the idea is that, late stage capitalism is, highly problematic. And there's a lot of issues with our current system. But G.K. Chesterton has this idea of don't knock the fence, the white fence over. Don't knock over fences if you don't know what's on the other side or what it's holding back, in a sense. So I guess the question, and I don't know if this is a good place to put it, but I usually ask this question because I ask it to myself. How do you know that what you're putting forth now and what I'm putting forth is not just another ideology? How do you know that David Patrick Harry 5 years from now is not going to look back and say, man, I got caught up into this and I was a Jesus freak for a while? Just like we're looking back at our encounter with Taoism and whatnot, or whatever it was, meditation or psychedelics. What is different? What is different that in 5 years from now, we're not going to be looking back and be like, oh man, we were caught up in this, whatever it was.
Right. The initial response in regards to where I'll be in 5 years is I don't know. I don't know if I'll still be in the Orthodox Church. God willing, I am. All I can tell people is that when I speak, is where I'm at right here, right now, I'm only telling you what I authentically believe to be true. And so I don't know what the future looks like. What I am doing is very different than any form of spiritual practice before, just based on the difficulty to even come close to the things that I talk about. When you do psychedelics, it's easy to talk about take psychedelics, love who you love, sexual promiscuity is a growth in one's own experience and discovery of the world. Do whatever you want. There are no limitations, because psychedelics themselves dissolve boundaries, which is part of this globalist problem, which is part of the devil convincing people he doesn't exist, because that's the dissolution between good and evil. So the dissolution of boundaries is a big problem. And the dissolution of boundaries occurs often when a society becomes feminized. Just look at any tribal society that worships a goddess. They have very little boundaries, right? So when the full moon comes, they have full moon orgies, and women get impregnated, but they don't know who the father is because they don't trace paternal lineage. It doesn't matter. The group, the collective grows or aids the women in raising the children. This is where we're moving. This is where the sort of relativistic framework, I think, is ultimately going. And so when it comes to what's different now, trying to not engage in sex. This is difficult for me. I'm a young man. I'm not young, really. I'm 31, but I'm trying to find a wife. I'm trying
Mm-hmm.
to, I want to build a family. I want to do what's right. Yeah, I'm tempted by sex quite a bit. I'm tempted by women. I'm tempted by lust. I'm tempted by, again, just like I like on a sunny day, like I can imagine a 70 some degree day. It's a beautiful evening, and somebody says, hey, they got some type of an inebriating substance, a friend or something. Hey, that would be really tempting. It's like everything to do what I'm doing isn't really, it's almost not that joyful.
Mm-hmm.
It's joyful in the sense that it feels like you're actually found truth. But it's really a very difficult process, and you're always putting yourself out to be a hypocrite, because to be a Christian is to ultimately be a hypocrite,
Mm-hmm.
because we're called to not sin, and you can't help but sin. And so
What is
to
your
me,
current?
that's
Yeah.
the biggest ones, is the humility. It's like when you were talking about your Reiki experience, I couldn't help but think about what I call the spiritual ego, the
Mm-hmm.
spiritual inflation, the psychedelic inflation, and that in the name of killing your ego or dissolving your ego or ego death, people will take high dose psychedelics, they'll go into these altered states, they'll claim the validity of these experiences, then they'll come back and claim that they're better than who they were from before, insinuating that you are not, because you also didn't go into those states, therefore actually inflating their ego in the name of destroying their ego. And so you do that more and more and more, you're only going to get to a place where you feel like you have all this gnosis
Mm-hmm.
that nobody else has, which insinuates, again, the separation of between you and your neighbor, right? Because your
Absolutely.
neighbor can't be you, because look at who you are and look at who your neighbor is.
Yeah.
And so that framework actually does the exact opposite of what people think they're doing.
Yeah.
That's the difference. It's like the more you get into this Orthodox stuff, the coherency, the logical consistency, and the fact that it's so damn difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, there's something going on here.
Take up your cross and follow me. Right. That's not a
Right.
metaphor. Like, it's sacrifice, and the big thing, and that's well said. I look at it as well as like the relationships and the quality of the relationships that you have locally, and the networks that you're building. The quality of those is a good kind of marker for me to see if I'm falling into kind of a spiritual ego again, and this idea of pornography, which is ubiquitous. And
Yeah.
you ask the question, why is pornography out there? It's all people want to make money off it. Well, it's free now. There's no money. I mean, it's free for anybody, right? And it's the most addicting drug, and it's
Yes.
prolific, and it's ruining men's lives and women's lives and relationships and families. And just for instance, you saw this thing that happened, this shooter in Georgia that he went and shot up some massage parlors, right? And when he was interrogated by the police, he said, no, this wasn't racially motivated at all. Is I have sexual dysfunction. I would go into these massage parlors, and he didn't say it like this, but his passions were inflamed, and he was going and sleeping with these girls, and he flipped his lid, and he went out there and shot up and killed 10 people. 5 of them happened to be Asian, and immediately the news was Asian hate crime. The
Yeah.
Asian community is under attack. And just I'm watching this say this. I'm like, oh my God, why would, first of all, the information is not out. You had Kamala Harris saying, our Asian community is under attack. So you want to you bring the Asian community into your coalition of destruction. Like, look what you're doing here. Are you not aware when you're saying, this is an issue of white supremacy? Like, what? Like, it's actually makes no sense. But if they really were to look at why he did this and why so many men are acting out in these ways, pornography is a big thing. And this
No, right.
sexual degeneration, you have Pepe Le Pew being canceled, and then you have Cardi B scissoring with whomever it
Exactly.
was on the
Literally
Grammys.
scissoring with another chick on stage.
It's like, it's so obvious to me
Right.
and to people that I talk about. And it's like, most people see it and are disgusted by it. Most people, but there's this small minority that has control of the switches, right?
Right.
Media, Hollywood, government, corporations, sports, and these small number of people that share the channels of communication. People are thinking, oh, nobody believes this anyways, but it's a problem, because when you call everything white supremacy, which there are white supremacists, but it was as an increasingly receding issue. was this kind of real white supremacy. They are summoning real white supremacy. And this overreaction from the left is going to cause an overreaction from the right. Right? And the consequences of that, just quickly, Mcluhan said very controversially that the American Civil War was not due to slavery. The American Civil War was due to the new media, the print media, the ubiquitous information of newspapers that were flowing everywhere and was changing the way people live their lives. What's happening right now? This move to decentralized media, this rapid changeover in technology, it looks like there's these race relations when in real life they're not. They're better than they've ever been in terms of the actual communities, but it's going to cause like a civil war because of this new technology that is reorienting people so quickly. Their nervous system can't keep up with it, right? So it's and just to kind of bring it back home, the passions and inflation of the passions, and this idea of being sexually enticed, or the passions can be being intellectually interested in being inebriated. That's something that I share, right? And trying to control the passions is extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult, but the rewards therein are, the passions are a gateway to your relationship with God, right? The passions in themselves aren't bad, but the inflaming of the passions, right, is what kind of demons do, right? They come in, oh, you're into that. Here you go, take it to the extreme and ruin your life. But trying and living a life of prayerful life of asceticism and of doing whatever you can to control the passions within yourself, not looking at your neighbors and being like, oh, you drink too much, or you do XYZ too much, doing within yourself and trying to work through prayer and the different, Orthodox tools that you're given to control your passions is something that drew me a lot back to the faith. And I still struggle greatly. In Lent here, I stopped drinking. I like to drink and get inebriated. And now it's been 9 days since I got drunk. That's the longest it's been since I was 18. And even though I don't get drunk and go crazy, I'll still have a lot of drinks. And so I sacrificed alcohol, but I have more things to sacrifice. And I feel in myself, oh, I'm not doing enough. I need to do more to struggle. I need to do more with my passions in a sense. So yeah, I'm with you.
I totally second that. Through Lent, because I've already failed with the whole fast thing, and that was going to be a difficult thing for me, because one of the things I also do on Church of the Eternal Logos is try to show people how to do bodybuilding and build their body, just because the necessity for testosterone is such. I mean, this is a whole topic in and of itself. Is just the role of testosterone, the lowering of testosterone levels in the average male, and how that again affects our society. And I can't help but think you used the analogy earlier about the sort of left hand and the right hand when you were talking about the icon of Christ. And I see the right hand is when that pendulum or the right gets too constrictive. You have the Pharisee. Mm-hmm. You have a juridical structure, and you're going to get a lot of you get virtue signaling on both ends of this side, which is really interesting, right? The mm-hmm. virtue signaler comes about, and again, because Christ is the opposite of the virtue signaler, he's in the middle, right? The virtue signaler actually is in the middle between the mercy and the rigor knowledge mm-hmm. of things. But the left hand, at somebody who studies religion, there's a whole field called the left-handed path. This is called tantric traditions. And so the left-handed path, or tantric traditions, tantra in and of itself, is the inversion of what is typically considered the right-hand path. Mm-hmm. And so another way of just saying that is just saying that Satanism is the inversion of Christianity, and mm-hmm. and Satanism is a left-handed path, of course. But what we're saying is a little bit more nuanced, because the problems are on both ends of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. And that Christ, the Logos, being the uniter of opposites, being the creator of all things, has to be in the middle, because he can't be polarized. And that's why he is both living. That's why he's both the source of life and he's the murderer of death. He is both God and he's both fully man. Mm-hmm. He's both before time and he's inside time. Like it's a continual collapsing of dialectical tension. So he's never in tension. There is no tension with the ideology. That's, again, what brought me reading that as a non-believer and seeing the sophistication of the collapsing of dialectical thought within Orthodox theology. I'd never seen a system that its point was to collapse the problems that other systems found their identity in.
Yeah.
And so it was just so beautiful.
Christ fills the hierarchy, right? He's both, he's on the cross with a crown. He goes to hell, to Sheol, and he's both the top of the hierarchy and at the bottom of the hierarchy. He is the appropriate mediation of unity and multiplicity, right?
Yes,
he unifies multiplicity, and he appropriately multiplies unity. And right in the center, you have Christ. And in this book, I don't know if it's The Medium and the Light, Marshall Mcluhan and Eric Mcluhan, Reflections on Religion. I absolutely recommend it because he goes deep.
I've never read that book.
It was deep into these ideas. And he says in there, Christ, he says there's the medium and the message, right? And there's the content and the formal structure, which is the medium, and then the content. He says Christ is the medium and the message.
Right.
So he, just like you're saying, he collapses the dialectic and Hegel's dialectic, right? And just a few more minutes here, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. There's this idea. Hegel had a son that he resented, right? So the dialectic is thesis and a negation of the thesis, right? And then a consummation of that negation, the negation of the negation. You have the synthesis, right? So he sees the thesis, antithesis as a negative, right? So the thesis being God the Father, the antithesis, right, is the expression. The Son is the finite expression of the infinite, right? So the infinite expresses itself. It's a life-affirming thing. But from Hegel and, where Marx got his ideas from, thesis, negation, and then, synthesis. So we're constantly negating, and the negation of the negation is the progression of the absolute spirit, according to Hegel, right? But it's a bastardization of this idea of Christ, fulfilling the hierarchy. Right. Hierarchy in itself is not bad. Hierarchies are necessary. Hierarchies is how the world lays itself out. And to appropriately have a hierarchy where the head is sacrificing for the body and the body is supporting the head, right? That is how a marriage is supposed to work. The man sacrifices himself for his wife and his family, and the family supports him, just like the head of the body, right? It provides meaning and it provides information for the body. And what does the body do? It supports the head. So just to bring it home, the fractal universe is correct. Like the reality lays itself out as a fractal pattern, right? Christ is the structure, the function and the structure of reality as it's supposed to be. But we have fallen from that. And he is the answer. And I don't know what, watching this, if you've gotten this far, I don't know what you have to do to struggle with that. I would suggest to do so, and do it with give it 6 months. Really look at these ideas, and it's hard to do, but what do you have to lose? Look around you. Look around you.
No, I love that you're talking about how the validity of the fractal universe, and even the way that I spelt it with "you are the universe." It's still true. Again, this is the whole thing of what I try to do on Church of the Eternal Logos is Christianize truth that people perceive in other ways. And so Christ is in you. You are made in the image. The fractality of creation coming from the ultimate metaphysical source, the Logos itself, which is the source of pattern. It is a fractal pattern. It is repeating at a multitude of dimensions. It is representative of who you are supposed to become, not who you are in the present moment. And that just subtle distinction is a big deal in regards to illuministic frameworks or Orthodox theosis. But it is still true. Like, so you can totally take the same concept and you can show how it's true in an Orthodox framework. And that's basically what I try to do with my YouTube channel is to explore these ideas and bring and just re-articulate things for in new ways. The goal, every time I go on a stream, my goal is always to over deliver. So I want somebody to be almost overwhelmed with everything that's coming at them, because one, that shows the sincerity of what I'm trying to do, and that it is to build a career, right? I'm choosing to do this. That was another part of this whole trajectory, is I gave up trying to become a university professor. I'm still finishing my PhD, but I am not doing anything whatsoever to try to get a job in the university. I've thrown all my options into this Church of the Eternal Logos. This is the only thing I have as a career moving forward. especially with the things that I talk about, because I already know it ostracizes me from everything. So
and you sacrificed your YouTube channel, very lucrative, very popular channel where you were making a good living, right?
Yeah.
You got rid of it and you started from scratch.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you for that. I commend you for that.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And again, this is why I think, I don't mean to blow my own horn or be anything like that, but I think one of the reasons why I didn't get overly consumed, even though I was a content creator, I was a pillar in this community. Somehow I got out of it, I think, is because I'm honestly trying to figure out what was true. I honestly believed all that stuff. And when I came to a point where I honestly couldn't say that I still believed it, I couldn't continue to do that stuff because my heart wasn't in it. And so I had to do, again, what I felt was honest. I still made some videos because I had to pay for my rent. So there was still, after my 11/11/18 conversion, for months, I still made videos on that fractal universe because it was the only source of income I had.
Yeah.
But I couldn't continue with it. And so for me, what I'm trying to do now with Church of the Eternal Logos, and I always tell people this when I do one-on-one sessions privately, and they ask, is that for me, I'm trying to build people's trust that, I hope they donate. I hope that they give me a super chat or they become members on the website. But more important than that is that time after time after time, whenever they engage with my content, whether they engage with me personally, is they see the sincerity, they see that I'm trying to over deliver, and that builds trust. And then once I can earn somebody's trust, that's the goal, because I'm not going to do what I'm doing. And so if I can get 1,000 people to give me $5 a month because they trust me, sure, whatever the size of the overall audience is, doesn't matter. That's what I'm interested in, is the small group of people who trust you so much that giving you $5 a month for what you do, it's not even a question. And so if you can get that from 1,000 people to 5,000 people, that's all you need. And those people care about me. They support me. They are my career. And if something were to happen to my family or myself or my children or anything, those people who literally fund my life literally care about me. What corporation does that? What company does that? Right. And so that's like, for me, people see the videos and they're interested in what I'm going to say next. But for me, this is like a 5 to 10 year project. And so that's what I'm really excited about. And it being Christ-centered, I hope, again, that people can, I fail all the time. I make mistakes. I probably say wrong things every single time I go live, but I'm never trying to deceive people. I'm never trying to trick people. And that's why, for me, over delivering, trying to be as honest as I can and be even honest with my own struggles, that is going to do more. And so I just try to give every stream, I try to give my YouTube channel, and I've tried to give my life over to God, and that I can be a tool or a conduit for whatever that is, despite my own failings. I don't know what it's going to look like. I didn't know what this was going to look like, right? In September of 2019 is when I went full time with the Church of the Eternal Logos, and I had money saved up because I worked on the administrative side at the university that I was going to. So I had some money saved up, but when I knew I couldn't be a professor, and then my mother got sick, so she got diagnosed with a very rare form of MS. So I thought it would be a perfect time to actually move home, and I spent as much time as I can with my parents. And I started streaming and I started making videos, and it just feels like right now in 2021 that it feels like finally I'm getting the return on over a year of work.
Yeah. Wonderful, man. And there's the story of the prodigal son, man, returning back home. And, I thank you. And I encourage my followers and my subscribers to check you out and support you, because as we're saying, these different, and I guess we can close here, these different structures of the Bible are reappearing for a reason. And I think the main one, as we see the flood coming, is we need to build an ark. And the ark is not just a boat, right? Dante's comedy, it was an ark in, the 10th, 11th, 12th century when he was writing, right? And I see you building an ark, and this network of people on YouTube doing it as, not knowing exactly what we're doing, but we're building a structure that people hopefully can count on, that could be there to support ourselves and people through what's coming. because we don't know what's coming. But I trust in Christ, and I trust in you and what you're doing. And again, I thank you very much for spending your time and your energy and opening your heart to me, and I appreciate you very much. So, any last words before we
Well,
close?
thank you very much, brother, for those kind words. I truly do appreciate it.
Yeah.
And that's again what means the most for me, is really just connecting with people, again, building people's trust.
Yeah.
So thank you for the opportunity. If anybody is interested in anything that I may have heard today, check out my YouTube channel, Church of the Eternal Logos. No, it is not a real church. No, I am not a minister. I belong in the Orthodox church. But the reason, again, I try to explain to people why, what that whole thing is the intention was to build a community. And so there's a reason why I didn't name it David Patrick Harry, or make the thing my own name, because I wanted it to glorify God. And eventually, again, part of that 5 to 10 year process is that Church of the Eternal Logos sponsors people doing whatever it is that I'm doing in their medium. Maybe that's painting, maybe that's poetry, maybe that's music. And that's one of the things I've been trying to do, is I've found a couple young Christian artists and give them a platform. They can create songs, and I'll make videos for the visuals for their music, and I'll put them on my YouTube channel. And these, in my mind, is the Church of the Eternal Logos is my attempt to have a sort of very worldly vision of orthodoxy. And so I'm not a church. I am not clergy. Don't ever want to be clergy. I am a lay person, and I describe myself as hopefully a public intellectual. But the goal is to create things that are so beautiful or so profound or so astonishing or just deep that it brings people close. They're interested. It increases the mystery, and it brings people in. And that's the whole point. And the goal would be eventually to be a platform for all types of people that are building bridges. The point is to build bridges. And that's my mind. In my mind, it's always about bridge building, because I'm just trying to build bridges into orthodoxy, because it is such a difficult thing. And that's part of what I felt my providence is. God gave me this, or not to give me, but I falsely chose through my own free will a wrong path. But through that ignorance, acquired a vocabulary and a body of knowledge that when I was presented with orthodoxy, one, I could understand it. And then by that marinating inside myself and then trying to live it, I can try to re-articulate it to people. And hopefully I can cut down that process that takes months and years to get into orthodoxy, that with me. And there's so many other people. So it's not just me, Jay Dyer's doing, he's been doing this much, much longer and talks about this stuff. He waxes more eloquently on topics than I can. I just try to do what my skill set is, which is again, towards the sort of more contemporary forms of spirituality, which is so appealing, and building bridges into orthodoxy. So thank you very much. If anybody hears this and they're interested, check me out there, or go to my website, davidpatrickharry.com, churchoftheeternallogos.com, takes you to the same place. And that's really it, man. Thank you for having me. I appreciate sharing. We'll definitely have to hop on and talk again. I feel like there's so much that we didn't even get into.
Definitely. Yeah, man. And I think I'll leave it with, so Father Seraphim Rose, I got a couple of his books. He has a book that I'm going to purchase probably today, and it says, Orthodoxy is the religion of the future. Like, when you hear that, it's like, wow, what this old thing. So what that's going to look like, what that means, it's not up to me or you, but I'd love exploring it with you, man. So thank you so much.
That would be, that'd be a great time. I got that book right here, actually.
Okay.
Thinking about that topic, and I'll just say a real quick thing is that, just look at orthodoxy. The premise of orthodoxy in the religion of the future is that orthodoxy is going to remain orthodoxy. And so when we look at the New Age and the spiritual but not religious, or new Catholic ideas, or Protestant theology in America, we see how all these things are becoming more like each other. But the religion of the future has to be in opposition to the world. So as all these other ideologies in the world become more and more synonymous with each other, orthodoxy itself, I think, it's going to be more apparent to either be
the right one if you have some discernment and your noose isn't so darkened, or it's going to seem like the outcast, the one that totally doesn't get it, because it is going to become more apparent that it's in opposition to the rest of these movements.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
even though we have it inside the Orthodox Church. So the Orthodox Church isn't perfect. We got bad patriarchs, we got bad bishops, we got bad priests, we got entire funded structures that are trying to promote homosexuality and degeneracy in the church. So, but Christ promised that those things wouldn't prevail against the true church. Yeah. And so that's another, I think, a great argument for why Orthodoxy is the true church. There's a reason, if you're a Westerner, why you haven't heard of it. There's a reason that you're not aware of it. There's a reason you haven't heard of theosis. And the true purpose of Christianity was so that you can become God. There's a reason, because the father of lies has kept you from hearing that.
Yeah. Orthodoxy ultimately means right glory. Orthodoxy. It's the right way to glorify God. The frogs croak, the birds chirp, the flowers bloom, right? Orthodoxy is the appropriate way for human beings to worship the Most High. So thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep. God bless. Talk to you soon.
God bless you and yours.